Hello everyone, in this demo we're going to walk through using a while loop both to check a user's input and to produce some output in a repeating pattern. Alright, so I already have the introduction to the program in here. It says this program will display the positive integers less than the positive integer that you input. So the first thing we'll do is just ask the user for an input number. So I'll declare a variable up here and then allow the user to input the number there, and also put a little prompt line here too. So please input a positive integer. All right, so at this point, you would want to bring in what's called a validation loop that makes sure the user actually followed your directions. So we'll do that here. Let's say while the user's number is something that's less than or equal to 0, that wouldn't be a positive integer, we're going to let them know if they made a mistake and give them the ability to type something in again. So we'll say cout, you must enter a positive integer. And please enter again. And then num. Okay, so when you're designing these programs that involve multiple steps, it's a good idea to stop along the way and make sure things are working well. So we're going to do this now. We're going to build this and make sure this input validation loop works the way we want it to. Okay, so please enter a positive integer. We'll say -5. We won't follow directions. So that caused this loop to go. The user's number was not something that was positive, so that input validation loop is going. We'll say maybe -3, 0. Okay, I'm finally getting to point 10, and that loop stops. And so again, just a reminder of the syntax here. This while loop heading doesn't have a semicolon at the end of it. That's an oftentimes a mistake you might make in the beginning when coding these loops. That's a code block heading, no semicolon at the end. These two braces group these two statements together, and then style-wise, that indentation is good to use too. All right, so now let's get to using another loop that displays all the positive integers less than the one that the user entered. So that's going to bring in the need for another variable. We're going to want to start at 1 and work our way up to whatever number the user entered, but not including that number. So I'm going to declare another variable that we're going to call counter. We'll say int counter equals 1. And this will work up towards that value that the user entered. And what we'll do is just repeat the process of displaying the value of the counter, adding 1 to it, and then stopping that process once we hit this value of num. So my loop heading is going to say while my counter value is less than the user's number value, num. What we'll do is display the value of that counter, put it on its own line, and this by itself would display the number 1 likely again and again and again. We need to have something in this loop that updates the value of counter so that this condition eventually becomes false. So we're going to give this a counter plus plus. That plus plus is a common symbol in C++ for adding 1. Again, that's equivalent to counter equals counter plus 1, but that happens so often in this C++ and other languages, people just use counter plus plus. All right, so let's see if this does what we say it will. Okay, so input a positive integer, let's say 10 at this point. And okay, so we have this loop running down here now that outputs the number 1, and then it adds 1 to that to get 2. 2 is still less than 10 that the user entered, so we'll see a 2. It'll add 1 to that again to make 3, and that process repeats up until we see the number 9. So at the last step, what's happening is it'll display the number 9. It'll do the plus plus call on that to make the value of counter be 10, and that's not strictly less than the 10 that we entered. Again, following directions here carefully, it says strictly less than the number that you entered. So this loop, that's why it doesn't have that equal to sign in it. So that's just some basics of designing both an input validation loop here and a loop that produces output in a repeating pattern here. Whenever you're designing your loops, just make sure there's a way for the loop to end. Just for fun, let's look at what an infinite loop would look like. I'm going to comment this line out just to show you what would happen if we didn't update the value of counter. Say input a positive integer, we'll say 15, and then boom, I have this infinite list of 1s happening because again, that loop, there's no way to end that. So just make sure whenever you're designing loops, that's one consideration to make is when is this loop going to end? Otherwise, you can fall into that common trap of an infinite loop if you don't have a way to cause it to end. Again, just build this one more time to see. So input a positive integer. Technically, in edge case here would be 1 because There are no positive integers less than 1, so nothing outputs in that case. That does make sense. And again, just one more time for good measure. Input 5, I should see 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, everything's working well there. So again, this is just to remind you of both that validation loop and just some basics of designing, kind of a simple loop to produce output in a repeating pattern.